Around 3,500 years ago, a mysterious people came from the regions of Balkh and Afghanistan to modern-day Punjab in the Indian subcontinent. These people were our distant ancestors. Scholars give them a name, Indo Aryans. These people left a mark on Indian civilization and still form the backbone to which most of our identity is derived from. However, in our popular consciousness, there is a tendency to look at the civilization and culture of ancient India as at best a copycat cousin of the world civilizations of Europe or Persia, or at the worst, an archaic primitive society that paled in comparison to China, Semitic, and European civilizations. Notable culprit for this viewpoint are at one side our political aisle, those inspired by the colonial viewpoint, those with biases towards their religious cousins, and those that have a tendency to oppose any kind of religious tradition. Oftentimes these groups and their source of chauvinistic views switch places or even overlap. Moreover, even those positive towards the broader Indian tradition give its credit to later Shramanic or the prior in the civilization of the people. However, in this video I'll argue that the Indo Aryan ethos is not just different from other civilizations, but also exceeded them in many ways. It is not just a backdrop or a precursor to the later advanced and egalitarian Shramanic civilization, or a footnote to the previous Indus civilization, but important, great, and unique in its own respect. Whose glory is very less described in words, and more in looking at the living remains of their contributions. Now, one of the most defining and controversial systems of the ancient Indian civilization has been the caste system. The division of society into groups: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and the untouchables. Hang on a minute. Isn't the system of social stratification common around the world? Indeed. Whether it be feudal Europe, ancient Persia, or China, a class or caste structure emerges everywhere. What differentiates the Indo Aryans, however, from others is the universal and almost sacred exaltation of knowledge above all. The trustees of knowledge, aka the Brahmins, are accorded the highest position in religious texts, not on account of their birth, which is incorrectly assumed, but based on the quality and quantity of their knowledge. Whether it be in the Purusha Sukta, giving them the crown position, or the Manu's Dharma Shastra, that calls them the most exalted group. This wasn't only spiritual or ritualistic knowledge, but practical and theoretical knowledge from maths and sciences to architecture, metallurgy, and even warfare. This contrasts heavily with almost every civilization, like China and Japan, where the state and monarch is the ruler and the highest. Europe, where earlier the Roman emperor and then the feudal lords, or in the Muslim world with the caliph. The fundamental point being, the Indo Aryans saw learning as superior to bloodshed and violence. They were more attuned to creation rather than destruction. And this wasn't just later corruption. This has been found in the earliest scriptures, from the Vedas to the Upanishads. The result? Despite centuries of assault and struggle, the Indian civilization stands strong, even today, unlike its counterparts in Greece, Persia, Rome, and to some extent, even China. Warfare as a moral duty. In modern times, it is a very common notion that the notion of holy warfare, while criticized, is a monopoly of Semitic faiths like Christianity and Islam. However, in this video I'll argue that the Indo Aryan people had discovered holy warfare and considered it a spiritual mission long before them. For this I'll go back to the ancient text of Mahabharata. The Mahabharata, one of the oldest texts of the world and also the longest, are not just a spiritual text but a semi-historical book narrating events possibly as old as 1500 BC. Previously I had mentioned that the Indians saw learning as superior to bloodshed. But what if that learning and the culture it produced was in danger? That's when the sword must rise. In the epic, we see Arjuna, the prince, is in a dilemma about killing, especially killing his own kin. What right did he have to kill anyone? It reflects an early example of a society grappling from the ethics of war to bloodshed to violence and murder. Yet his teacher and friend, the lord of the Yadus, what does he say? Yadus, an ancient Indo Aryan tribe, was very prevalent in the book of Mahabharata as well as scholars estimate in the time the Indo Aryans entered. Now the lord of the Yadavas, Sri Krishna, implores Arjuna to fight. He gives Arjuna the knowledge, immemorial knowledge, that has been forgotten by man, Nara, and resurrected by Narayan, the god. In context, the journey of Nar and Narayan has been echoed from the Rig Veda in the figures of Indra and Vishnu, now that has taken the form of Arjuna and Sri Krishna in the epic. This shows that the later Mahabharata and the broader Hindu tradition is not at all a corruption, but rather a single thread that runs from the ancient Vedic spheres to modern day. For Krishna, he reasons that the sword is appropriate to defend the culture and religion and morals as a dharma yudh, or as we call it, the holy war. He even says, and I quote, "Losing and dying in this war will lead to heaven, while winning will lead to the earth." A clear millennia before the Islamic Arab civilization and a negation of the Semitic European idea of live by the sword, die by it. Dying and living for or by a sword for faith and virtue is good and superior according to our tradition. Another point I would like to mention over here is the notion of kingly virtues. One of the very fascinating terms in Indian cultural space is the idea of Raj Dharma, a set of moral and political expectations from a king in a society. In Indian context, we have the Buddhist and Hindu view emphasizing differing views of kingship. I will not go into details currently because that is off topic. The expectation and ideal of a king was thought to be a Raja Rishi, or a royal sage, who was to rule not with force but with wisdom. One of the most important virtues was protecting his subjects from internal crime as well as external enemies. A certain scholar mentions, all forms of dharma merge in the Raj Dharma. Raj Dharma is the head of all dharmas. The state, unlike in the age of European enlightenment, was seen as a nurturing and protective, very similar to a view we have today. In certain texts, anarchy, like a modern individual right, was seen as Matsyanaya, or the law of the fish, and dangerous. Some scholars state that since a king enjoys the fruit of taxes from the people, it is his duty to serve the polity. Thus, it makes kingship a transaction and a recognition of civilian body as a unit that forms a relation with the king, who is another unit. This view is not very different from Rousseau's social contract. Unlike in Europe or China, the ruler, or as we call it Rajan, wasn't a God-given representative, but a representative of the people, who exists as long as he protects, nurtures, and keeps the people happy. Certain other texts mention that a king's duty was not just to protect the populace, but also to protect the customs, traditions, and the social ways of life, even in the conquered territory, a clear admission of the pluralistic nature of kingship. The king was also asked to care for the property of the minors, widows, and women without guardians, aged, blind, and crippled. These people were not abandoned like in the East, but protected more so than in the West. Another text mentions that the rights of the Pasandas, or non-Vedic people, such as Buddhists and Jains, they had the right to their samaya, or their traditional rules and religious duties, and violating these could lead to sin for the king. Now, this is not a claim that the kings always follow these guidelines, just like in any society. However, even a moral framework to judge the kings rather than unquestioned authority reveals something unique about our people. That is never to give in to tyranny and having the only abstract vrata or dharma as the righteous ruler, not the man. Now, I agree, many civilizations may have forms of these qualities here and there, but it is the Indic people who mastered these in their social landscape at a time when the world was living in darkness. And that created a culture not of the East and West, but an amalgamation of positives of both, which created the world famous Indian civilization, still unique and unparalleled around the world.